Yep.
Perfect. All right. So I think all of you have some experience with code reviews. It sounds like either through bootcamp or even through this just past week. But we just wanted to go over what makes a really good code review, give you some tips on how to approach a code review when you're the one reviewing the code, as well as when it's your PR that's actually being reviewed. So just some of the things we're going to cover. What is a code review? The cycle. What makes a code review a really good code review? And then that give and take of if it's my code versus others' code, how do I actually approach it? So first thing, what is a code review at its most basic form? You've all done it in some shape or fashion. And essentially a code review is a conversation about a set of changes. But it's also a really good way for a team to share knowledge and actually learn from others. So when you join a team for the first time, your first code reviews are a really good way for you to start understanding the form of the code base, how your colleagues might approach the code, styles, and things like that. So a code review is a really good way to share that knowledge communally, not just between the people actually talking on the CR, but also other people that can go back and look at the pull requests later for some guidance. So it's really a collaboration space where you can share your work and ask questions, and it helps your team decentralize knowledge, share responsibility, and improve that overall code base quality. So that's what we want to have in mind when we approach a code review. The code review cycle itself is pretty straightforward. Once you have changes that you're wanting to be reviewed, you open a pull request, ask for some feedback. You receive feedback and then make the changes as you need to. And as soon as you have an approval, you merge it into the code base. So this is really what I wanted to cover. What makes a code review a great code review? I'm curious, has anybody ever had a code review, and you can just do show of hands, that you were just like, oh, this is rough. Like, this is a rough experience. Lauren answered. So I think a lot of people approach code reviews with very good intentions, but I think there are some things that make code reviews really good, and then there's some things that can make code reviews pretty painful. And I think on the top of things that can make code reviews painful is focusing on stylistic changes that really should be left for Prettier and ESLint. And you can see we have a couple examples here. So looking at semicolons, spaces, tabs, if these are really egregious, I think they're worth mentioning. You know, if somebody's formatting is just way off and unreadable, you do want to say something. But in general, it's better to leave kind of smaller issues like that, not for CRs. Just encourage them. If you see a bunch of things like that, maybe say, hey, listen, our team uses Prettier. If you need help getting that set up, I'm happy to get that set up for you, but there's no need to go through and add a bunch of little things in the CR. What's better to focus on is the overall impact of the code. So trying out the feature locally in your test environment, making sure the code is really easy to understand. So you, as somebody who hasn't been working on it, can you look at it at a glance and understand pretty clearly what's going on? And also, don't just use code reviews for saying, hey, this is what needs to be fixed. If you see something really impressive, like if you like the way somebody's written a function, or if you think that their approach is really elegant, make sure to mention that as well. PRs are a really good place to have praise, especially because they're so public and other teammates and managers can see them. If you feel a teammate is doing a good job, it's also important to call that out. So running the code locally, this is something that I actually feel very strongly about. I think that anytime you do review a pull request, you should always pull the feature locally and actually try it. It's really easy to just look at the code and think, oh yeah, this looks good, this will definitely work, and then pull it down, and you might catch an edge case that they missed, or you might approach something a slightly different way than they did. So as tempting as it is to just say like, oh, looks good to me, thumbs up, I would always test the code locally, give it a try, and then leave your comments afterwards. And if you're not sure exactly how to test a PR, I think it's okay to go ahead and ask the author, hey, what are the actual steps that you would use to test this code? And then from your perspective, if you want a really thorough code review, how can you help others do that? So the first thing I would do is add a meaningful PR description. And I want to call out Kat and Lauren. I think you all did a really nice job here. This is exactly what we did in this PR. This is the acceptance criteria. So when I went in and actually pulled this PR down and tested it, it was very, very easy for me to know what I was looking for, what should be working, what shouldn't be working. So I think you all did a really nice job there. If possible, writing meaningful commit messages is also really helpful, and then dividing your commits by different steps, especially if you have a fairly large feature task and you're dividing that into smaller steps. Breaking that up by commit can be really helpful. Self-reviewing your code, so just explaining why you might have approached something a certain way. And asking questions, I actually do this quite a bit at work. I'll highlight a portion of my PR and say, this is how I approached it. I actually don't know if this is the best way. Can I get some feedback on this? So if there's specific code that you really want others' input on, just highlight that and call it out. And then screen capture tools are very, very helpful. So I personally use Loom. I really like it. Zappy is also awesome. I really like using Zappy, as well as Sketch. So even just recording yourself going over either the code itself or the feature, that can help people quite a bit in seeing what they need to review. I'm going to stop here. Does anybody have any questions about what I've covered so far? Or any places where you maybe disagree?
I don't have any like a question. I was just going to add, I think it was a previous mentor or participant I worked with was saying like for the commit part, it's almost like you're telling a story. So like as you commit, if you break it down little pieces, and you can kind of follow that story along and see kind of exactly like what they were doing that led up to the PR, which I always kind of have that in my head whenever I do my commits and like the process I go through. I always find that really useful for helping people see what I did.
I like that a lot. That's a really good way to approach it. Yeah, it's funny. It's always funny to see a commit that's something like, oops, or, oh, I broke this. And those are always funny to see, but they aren't very descriptive, to your point, Matthew. So yeah, when you can make them more descriptive and tell that story, I think that is a good way to think about it. All right, so I'm actually going to jump over to GitHub here because this is something that I learned recently actually from Collab Lab. So thank you, Collab Lab, for teaching me how to do this. If you want to review a PR by commit, so when you go to the actual pull request and you click Files Changes, you can scroll down and see all of the code that was changed. And Lauren and Kat, thank you again. I'm using your PR as an example here. But if you want to actually look by commit, you can go here and see changes from all commits. And now I can see all of the commits that you all have added here, and I can start here. If I just want to look at your first, now it's really easy for me to see the code that was added by commit. And if I wanted to cycle through that instead of having to go through the drop-down menu each time, I can go over here, press next, and jump to the next commit. So if I wanted to go commit by commit, this is a really easy and clear way to do it. And then another thing that you can do on GitHub, and I actually use this quite a bit at work as well. So if I change this to all commit, and let's say I'm looking at your CSS, okay, great, I think this looks great. I can click view and it'll just auto collapse for me. And that's a nice way, especially if you have a PR that has quite a few files changed and you want to keep track of what you've looked at already. It's just a nice way to keep track of that for you. So those are just some of the features on GitHub that you can use. And I want to open the floor to all of you. What has been your experience in the past with code reviews? And then did you have any thoughts on how it felt to do code reviews this week? Also, if you have any strong opinions too on what you personally like to get out of code reviews versus what you look for in code reviews, I'd be really curious to hear.
Well, maybe I'll go first. I have never had code reviews in this way. I've had code reviews where I had like small finished labs or small project, well, big projects, but usually once they're completed, not along the way. And I always really appreciate any feedback about how I can make something more efficient or effective or clean. So yeah, I really do appreciate any tips you guys have.
Thanks, Lauren. That's a great one. I like that too. Like I'll, when I'm working with my team, I'll highlight a function I'm working on often and just be like, hey, is there a better way to do this? It's satisfying to get that kind of feedback. Anyone else have thoughts?
I love what you shared earlier in the presentation, that a PR is really useful for the future. So I find myself going back and looking at old PRs all of the time. So the more information and the more communication that happens in that pull request is really, really useful. And then I guess one other thing that I do personally that's helpful for me is I always do a self-review. So when I submit a PR, I'll put in any applicable comments, like, wasn't quite sure what to do here. I mean, that's exactly what Keely had said, like, this does the job, but I imagine there's a better way. Or, you know, if something, if a particular piece of code is a little goofy looking, I can say, okay, this is why I had to do it this way, and point out the relevant articles maybe, or blog posts that I referenced to solve a particular piece of functionality. Again, like, it's good for the reviewers and it's good for future people to be able to look at.
I did want to call out one thing, just a pattern that I've noticed in kind of healthy code review environments is a default to acceptance. I wanted to highlight, so Andrew actually gave me a code review as I was onboarding here, and I made one mistake. My photo was the wrong size, but you notice here he says, hey, approving this so you can merge once you make that change. And I do try to do that as much as possible, especially if the change is small, or if it's just a disagreement on how you would handle something versus the way another person would handle something. I do try to default to approval whenever possible. And I think that that's a good practice in general, as long as there's not breaking changes.
Yeah, that's super important when you have a big group, maybe spread out across time zones and things, and it's really costly to go through like another approval cycle. And in a case like with yours, like just resize the image and we're good. It's not like I don't trust you to do that. I need to check it. You know what I mean? So it makes a ton of sense to sort of default to approval there.
All right. Any other thoughts or questions that people have?
I really loved the PR template. I thought that was absolutely amazing, and it really set us up for success because we knew exactly what we needed to outline, so that we could make it as like sort of robust as possible.
Yeah, I'm with you, Kat. I love having good PR templates. I think they're so helpful.
Is this typical? Is this how all of your work setups are?
I'd be curious to hear, Andrew and Lauren, yours. We do use a PR template at work. I love it. We try to add it anytime we have a new repo. We use that same template and modify it as we need to. But yeah, the places I've worked have had them.
Yeah, the template is actually based on the one that we use at Zapier. But Zapier is the first place where I've worked where we had a template. So it's great. Yeah, super helpful.
I just wanted to throw out there that during this, I saw that and I was thinking, how is everybody making them look so beautiful?
Yeah.
I've never seen those before. And I was like digging through that as you guys were talking. Like, oh, that's crazy. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.